Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of South Korea's education sector today, International Education Market Updates, Trends, and Developments. My name is Kate. I'm the Manager of Market Support and Partnership Development here at BC Council for International Education. And thank you so much for joining us today on what I hope will be a very informative session regarding Korean international education. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that at BCCIE, we live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I would like to also invite everyone to take a moment to look around and think about the lands that you are on, to reflect on your relationship with the land and how this affects you and the work you do. And we would like to also invite you to put your land acknowledgement in the chat box. Now move on to a few housekeeping items. I know we're all very familiar with Zoom. Just briefly, all the attendees will be muted during the webinar, and there is a chat function for you to provide your comments or ask questions to the panelists. And also, in case you have any technical issues, please feel free to send a message to us. My colleague Juan from BCCIE is also on the call today, so we'll be here to support you from the back end of Zoom. Without further ado, I would like to invite today's speakers, Ms. Regine Lapointe, First Secretary and Trade Commissioner, and Ms. Sohee Park, Trade Commissioner from the Embassy of Canada to Korea. Over to you, Regine and Sohee.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, bonjour, everyone. As Kate introduced, my name is Sohee Park, and I'm a Trade Commissioner at the Embassy of Canada to Korea. I'm pleased to welcome you all to the Korean Education Market Briefing today. And many thanks to Kate and BCCIE for inviting me to this webinar. And I'm already seeing some familiar names here, and I was really impressed with the strong interest you have shown in Korean market, and I'll try to cover as much as I can today. Before we get started, I would like to share the outline of today's presentation. So first, Regine will provide quick facts about Korea and what education means in Korea. And I will speak more on the education market in Korea. I believe it is important to understand the country itself, its background, and why education matters so much in Korea. So now over to Regine to provide the facts about Korea.
Thank you very much, Sohee, and good evening, good morning to everyone. As Sohee and Kate mentioned, my name is Regine Lapointe. I'm the First Secretary and Trade Commissioner here at the Embassy of Canada to South Korea. So let me begin by giving you a few key facts about Korea. Now, I wonder how many of you know the physical size of Korea compared to Canada. Now, you may not have realized, but Korea is about the same size as New Brunswick, so it is 100 times smaller than Canada. However, the population is about 52 million people, so you can see that there's quite a high population density here. Korea is the 10th largest economy now in the world, and their economy is expected to grow by about 3.3% this year. Also, what I want to emphasize is that Korea is a developed country. They have a very strong industries, for example, in information communication technologies and in automobile. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the names of large Korean companies such as Samsung, LG, and Hyundai. What that means is that the standard of living is quite high in Korea, and many parents have the financial means to send their kids abroad for study. However, demographically, Korea is a rapidly aging society. In fact, it has the lowest birth rate among all OECD countries. So we can expect that Korea's student population will be declining over the coming decades. Next slide, please. Okay, let's move on to the importance of education in Korea. As Sohee has alluded to, Koreans place a very strong emphasis on education. And in order to understand this, we have to go back 70 years to the aftermath of the Korean War. At that time, Korea was a devastated country and had to rebuild from nothing. In a country where you have very limited natural resources, the government really put the emphasis on the development of its human capital. So this coincided with a very quick economic growth, and the government continued to invest strongly not only in education, but also in research and technological innovation. Therefore, many people believed at the time and still today that the only way to get out of poverty is to become successful, and to become successful is to invest in education. For that reason, education continues to be extremely important in Korea. Now, as you can see from this from the slide, Korea is one of the most educated country in the world, and in fact, when you look at tertiary education, Korea ranks first with 69% of the almost 70% of the population. Canada follows in second with about 63%. Here, I want to mention that the main difference between Korea and Canada here is that Korea has a high proportion of bachelor's degree, while Canada has more of an evenly kind of spread share between the short cycle tertiary, bachelor's, and master's program. Next slide, please. Now, continuing on the meaning of education, the pictures that you see here are representative of the Sunangdae. So the Sunang is the scholastic ability test in Korea. So it is the university and college entrance exam that every student has to take. This is one of the most important days in their life because it will determine whether and to which university they can study. It is also regarded as one of the most important dates in the whole Korean society, and you will see that everybody is participating in that effort. Here in the photos, you can see, for example, police or a taxi driver, or even just civilians helping students get to their exam locations on time. Also, when they take the oral comprehension section of the test, even the airplanes will stop flying to ensure silence. So for Koreans, academic success is really getting into one of the top tier universities in Korea. For example, the Seoul, Korea, and Yonsei University, or so-called Sky universities. And professional success usually means having a high-paid white-collar job in a large company, or also jobs that have a high social status, such as doctors and lawyers. So Korea is a very competitive society, and really Koreans are aiming for the highest levels possible. Of course, the younger generation is starting to shift a little bit their perspective regarding what it means to be successful professionally. However, the parents are still the one making the most important decisions regarding education. Next slide, please. This is also a very typical picture of Korea. These are pictures of hagwon, or the so-called private tutoring academies that are really widespread and ubiquitous in Korea. In fact, it's really difficult to find a student that doesn't attend some sort of hagwon after school. So this means that Koreans do spend a lot of money on private education. Now, when students are not either in school or in a hagwon, they also go to many study cafes and paid study libraries. So as you can imagine, most of their time is spent on learning, studying, and education. Next slide, please. And lastly, just to follow up on the importance of private education, this slide gives you a bit of a breakdown between government expenditure and private expenditures on education in Korea. This is 2019 data. We have 2020 data. However, we have decided not to include them because the pandemic meant that the data was collected a little bit differently, and therefore they're not comparable. So here you can see that about 30% of total expenditures on education is private expenditure, so by individuals. So this is quite high. Now, the pie chart you have at the bottom of the slide gives you a breakdown of how this money is, the private expenditure is divided among key subjects. So you can see that mathematics and English make up over half of the private expenditure. Now, this as you can see, can implies that there are opportunity for Canada's education, both in math and also in English as second language. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I will pass the floor back to Sohee. Thank you.
Thank you, Regine. And I'm just gonna continue with the presentation here. Okay, so now let's see how the Korean education system works. In Korea, the National Education Administration is governed by both the central and provincial organizations. The Ministry of Education here is the central administrative body governing overall educational affairs at the national level, including the formulation of policies on human resources development, school education, lifelong learning, and academic affairs in general. Currently, there are 17 metropolitan and provincial offices of education and 176 district offices of education. A district office of education serves as a local educational administrative agent, which facilitates and supports the implementation of educational policies in local schools. Korea has a single track of 6-3-3 school system. So the government provides free education up to middle school, which is year 9, and high school was not considered compulsory. So students have to pay for the high school education until recently. However, the high school education also became free from 2021. The Korean school year operates on a 2-semester system. So the first semester runs from March to June, and the second from September to December, which is a little bit different to Canada. And the vacation for summer, it's from July to August, and for winter, it's from January to February. As you can see in this slide, there are 4 types of high schools in Korea. Among them, special purpose high school, which I have colored in light blue, such as science high school, foreign language high school, and autonomous high school are what is so-called elite high schools. So this is like the schools where top selected students attend. But on November 2019, the Ministry of Education in Korea announced that they will abolish all the elite high school by March 2025 to improve fairness in the education system. And now there has been a lot of debates on this. And as for the post-secondary sector, you can see there are a total 228 universities and over 156 colleges in Korea. But if you look at it more closely, you will find that there are many private post-secondary institutions in Korea, unlike Canada. And now I'd like to speak to you about some of the recent changes in the Korean education sector and key policies of government. First, it is the closure of the elite high schools I just mentioned in the previous slide. So I'm not going further, but I still want you to know that this is one of the issues that has gained quite a lot of attention from the parents and students in Korea. So the decision to abolish elite high school probably can create more opportunities for Canada's K-12 sector in terms of student recruitment, because the top outstanding students may choose to study overseas as an alternative to those elite schools. Second, it is the introduction of high school credit system. It's already in use in Canada, but this credit-based evaluation system allows students to organize their entire academic course schedule depending on their interest and career path. In Korea, it was introduced at all Meister high schools in 2020, and it will be offered at all vocational high school in this year. And for general high schools, they will begin to phase in parts of the system from 2022, before its full implementation in all schools in 2025. It is still in trial period, but the feedback from students and like the industry is mostly positive because they can expand their choice of subjects, and it seems it has been adopted pretty well. But still, there are some concerns over senior students who only focus on the college entrance exams rather than Korea-related courses. And teachers will be burdened by excessive workload and higher intensity than before. And third, in accordance with 2022 revised curriculum, all students in Canada will take, in Korea, will take introductory AI, software, and other technology-related classes. Software education was already introduced in some middle schools from 2018 and phased into all middle schools in 2020. Elementary schools also began adopting the program in 2019. And Korean government also recently announced Korea will become 5th largest metaverse market by 2026. So the government will nurture more than 40,000 professionals and over 220 companies to specialize in metaverse. This means there will be greater emphasis for software education in the future at K-12 and post-secondary sector. And there may be another opportunity for Canadian education institutions if the institutions can introduce the English AI courses to the Korean market. Lastly, I'd like to touch on the popularity of international schools in Korea, because this can be such a challenge for all Canadian institutions. Currently in Korea, there are 6 accredited international schools in free economic zone, mainly in Jeju Island, and about 40 foreign schools in Korea, as well as many other foreign curriculum schools, which are not really accredited by Ministry of Education. So they are actually registered as Hagwon. But international school is an alternative for studying abroad because it can provide good English education without leaving the country. Even if the tuition fee is very high, many parents choose to send their kids to international schools. And especially after COVID-19, the demand is rapidly increasing. So even the Korean students who used to study overseas return to Korea and continue their studies here. Normally, the enrollment rates of international schools is about 70%, but for September 2021, the enrollment for 3 international schools in Jeju recorded 88.9%, which is the highest rate after the school opening. Now let's talk about post-secondary education now. Korean universities, because of the aging population, is facing biggest challenges now. They experience student shortage and financial difficulties, especially the private institutions, which is regarded less prestigious. So recent educational sector analysis showed that 71 out of 124 universities outside the capital region, most of them are private and lower down in the nation's rankings, will be unable to fill their admission quotas for the upcoming school year. And Korean universities also continue to show their interest in globalization to strengthen international competitiveness, both in inbound and outbound. While Korean universities try to attract foreign students to Korea and differentiate the mix of nationality of foreign students, they are also trying to establish more partnerships with foreign institutions. Still, here, the proportion of foreign language courses and the cooperation with foreign universities are relatively small in this country. And I'd like to also point out that Korean universities run study abroad programs, which sometimes funded by the government or university itself. But now it is now temporarily suspended, or most of them changed to virtual because of the pandemic. I believe the demand will increase once the international travel opens, but in these uncertain times, it's pretty difficult to say when the market will recover. And I'd like to tell you more about the impact of COVID-19 for schools in Korea. Like other nations, Korea had school closure and postponed school openings for some time, but now they are adjusting to the new normal. In Korea, Ministry of Education adopted strict measures like development of low-density classroom model, close monitoring of student symptoms by online self-health check on a daily basis, and social distancing policy. They also created online classes through platforms like e-learning sites and EBS online class, and provided free digital device rental to the low-income families. Thanks to these efforts and the country's excellent internet infrastructure, Korean students were able to continue at-school learning, and the implementation of online education has been relatively smooth. But yes, of course, there are problems. Many students and teachers have expressed frustration and say this widens the gap between the strongest and weakest students. And Korean government introduced what is so-called vaccine pass system. So here you will be no longer accepted at restaurants and some of the cinemas, cafes, and other public places unless you provide the proof of vaccination or negative COVID test result from January 10th this year. The vaccine credential will be valid for 180 days, starting 14 days after receiving a second dose. This is just a brief snapshot of the vaccination status in Korea as of February 7. So 86% of total population received second dose of the vaccines. And the rate is pretty high for the students aged from 16 to 18 years old as well. But you will notice the rate from 13 to 15-year age group is relatively low due to the concern over their health. And as I mentioned earlier, Koreans spend a lot of money on their English education. There are many ways students can learn English in Korea. The mandatory English education starts from grade 3 in elementary school, but a lot of young kids attend hagwons, which is private academies, or won't have one-on-one private tutoring, either in person or online. More parents send their kids to English kindergartens instead of daycare or other normal kindergartens. In 2019, there are over 560 English kindergartens, and over the last 10 years, the number of English kindergartens increased by 4.4 times in Korea. And also, the online learning has shown significant growth, particularly during the pandemic. So you will see the names of major online edutech platforms here, like Yanadu, 뇌세김, Speaking Max, and C1 School. Again, the international school is becoming more popular in Korea, which can be a big threat for Canadian education institutions. Now I'm going to show you some of the data for international education market. So first, let's look at the trends of Korean students' outbound mobility. And you have to know that the source of this data is the Korean Ministry of Education. So there is a discrepancy between Canada's IRCC data and Korea's data in total number of Korean students studying in Canada. So please just refer to this table to understand the general trend. If you look at this table, you can see that China and the United States are the top study destination among Korean students. But Canada has been the top 5 study destination from 2018. And in 2020, there are over 17,000 Korean students studying in Canada. And let's look at the data by subsector in detail. This graph here shows the changing trends for K-12 subsector. You will notice that the number of Korean students being sent to study abroad dropped dramatically from 2010 to 2017. The economic crisis in 2007 might account for the drop, and another reason for this decline would be the opening of new international schools, as I mentioned before. International schools and foreign schools in Korea are the alternative to overseas education, which can be considered a challenge for K-12 institutions. But these students and international schools can be a good target audience for post-secondary institutions. But well, here is one good news. Canada finally topped the list in 2019. Until 2018, Canada ranked second behind the US. If we look at the breakdown of K-12 data, Canada is particularly popular at elementary school level, both in 2019 and 2020. And for middle school, Canada is considered the second best country. Key factors influencing their choice include safe and welcoming study environment, competitive cost compared to other English-speaking countries, and the fact that Canada's immigration policy allows Korean parents to accompany their children while students are studying in Canada. And let's look at the changing trends of Korean students studying abroad at the post-secondary level. Canada is the top 5 destination of their choice here. But after the peak between 2008 and 2011, the total number of Korean students has slowly decreased with some ups and downs. This fall can be attributed to a number of factors. Among others, there is a growing perception that foreign degrees are not appreciated as much as before. When Korean students return home to get jobs after completing their studies abroad, they faced some challenges, realizing that they lack local connections to get a job. Korea is a relationship-based society, even when doing business. So in order to recruit more Korean students, I think Canadian institutions may promote the co-op programs, as the work experience in foreign countries is still valued more than the degree itself. And you can see the huge fall from 2019 to 2021, which is mainly due to the pandemic. And you can see the major competitors to Canada in terms of post-secondary education sector. Again, there is a discrepancy with Canada's IRCC data here. China and United States are top destinations for Korean students, but you can see the number has been falling from 2017 to 2021. Canada, as the top 5 study destination, comprises around 8% of the total Korean students studying abroad at post-secondary level. So far, we have reviewed the data released by Korean Ministry of Education. So I'm gonna look at the Canada's IRCC statistics. For Canada, South Korea is the 5th largest student sourcing country in 2020. Until 2019, Korea has consistently ranked 3rd. Surprisingly, which is not shown here, but Korea was the largest source country back in 2000. But since 2013, we are seeing slow growth again. Well, Korea is an established but mature market, which maintains steady student numbers. But still, there are potential to grow in every subsector because of increase of middle income families and stress over highly competitive educational environments, even from early childhood education. And this is the breakdown of the number of study permit holders for Korea by the level of study. If you see the trend from 2014 to 2020, apart from the impact of COVID-19, K-12 and college students had been increasing. K-12 is a traditionally strong sector, but Canadian colleges gained popularity over the last 5 to 6 years. The number of university students is not changing much, but you will notice the huge drop in the language training. And before I provide with you some practical advice, let me give you a short summary of international education market in Korea. First, it is the top 5 source country to Canada. Second, it is a rapidly aging society, but remember, Korea has a great passion for education and Korean parents are willing to spend money. Third, Korea is a heavily agent-driven market. Even adult students with good English skills, they still rely on agents because of logistical support and visa processes. And to tell you more about the subsectors, Canada is most preferable country for K-12 students. Well, due to COVID-19, K-12 sector may be impacted further for a while. And Canadian colleges has become more popular because of the work and immigration opportunities after students complete their studies. For Canadian universities, there is still a lack of brand awareness compared to other competitive markets like US, UK, and Australia. And lastly, for language schools, the interest is not as strong as in the past because in-country capacity to deliver English language program greatly improved. And in particular, during the COVID-19, there are even more online options domestically. And I have prepared a SWOT analysis for Canadian education institutions, but I think I pretty much mentioned everything provided here. So I will not go through each of them, but while you're reading it, I would like to point out this again. In Korea, the degree from a renowned overseas university or English language skills itself is not valued as much as before. But work experience or career-related training in foreign country is seen as competitive advantage to secure full-time employment. So I think this implies another opportunity for Canada because Canada has co-op program and Canadian colleges provide excellent vocational training programs. So I believe Canadian institutions need to make more effort to promote and brand these programs in Korea. And this is some of the articles in the local media that talk about the impact of COVID-19 on international education. To share the highlights, it says that the students are very frustrated after they have to give up the opportunity to study abroad, and the number of young students studying abroad has been significantly dropped. However, it says they still want to go overseas to study once the pandemic subsides. And now I'm going to share some general tips to be successful in the Korean market. I will start with the branding and recruitment activities. As I mentioned, Korea is a highly sophisticated, demanding, and brand-oriented market. So this market is actually best known by the speed and power of the referral and information that flow by word of mouth. So it will take some time, but it is an established and stable market. So please try to keep connecting with students, local partners such as agents and schools. And for example, when you host a webinar or information session, you may engage with alumni and let them share their experience in Canada. Also, you need to consider both online and offline promotions now, and social media marketing is very important. In Korea, Naver is the dominant platform with about 70% of market share. So it is the nation's biggest search engine, and Korean people refer to the information on Naver blog pages. The local agents also use Naver blog to upload information on the foreign education institutions. Maybe this not apply to all of you at this stage, but the best approach would be running the social media channels such as the Naver blog or Instagram in local language, which is in Korean. And I'm going to give you some tips when you work with agents. There is high employee turnover rate in this field. So maintaining up-to-date list of agents and training them is very important, but quite challenging at the same time, especially during the pandemic. And there are so many institutions in the education sector. So if you want to be remembered by the local agents, you should try harder. So some clients have asked whether they have to maintain partnerships with many agencies. And my answer is yes. Although only a few will be active for your institutions, they will still do something for institutions for the branding, such as posting a story about your school on their Korean websites or online social channels. So if you're a Canadian education institutions and want to receive the updated list of local agents, you can contact me after the webinar. I will provide my contact details later. Now, I'm gonna touch on the government-funded program. The Korean government and some local education offices often set aside funds to train their employees abroad or provide scholarship to students to experience studying abroad. So I have actually identified two specific programs here: Global Practical Training Program and Paran Sadari Program. The Global Practical Training Program is a 16-week program offered to the college students in Korea. So this program must combine the language training and work placement. Korean people are very interested in this kind of program because this may benefit when they find a job here. And that's why I have been advising many of my clients to consider the development of customized programs that include some of the Korea-focused training in Canada. And of course, it is not easy and it would require your time and effort. However, participating in those programs is a good means for word-of-mouth branding, and by building relationship with them, you might be able to identify other opportunities in the long term. And finally, partnership with Korean institutions. For universities and colleges, I also want to highlight when you are thinking about the student exchanges or any other sort of partnership programs, please consider two-way exchanges, not only the inbound. And for K-12 school districts, you can also consider the partnership opportunities with local education offices at provincial level. Sometimes they are looking for student exchanges as well, or teacher training programs. This may not be seen as a direct recruitment of students, but certainly this will create positive image about Canada. And in the long term, there may be some other opportunities for potential recruitment as well. And here are some of the major education fairs held in Korea for this year. So the first one is International Education and Immigration Fair, one of the largest show about studying abroad. We actually, as an embassy, participate in this fair with the Canada Pavilion. And this year, we also plan to participate, but it hasn't been confirmed. So I will let you know when our participation is confirmed. So if you're interested in this event, you can speak to me about it later. And the second fair is Education Korea, which will be held in April. This actually covers all the areas of education, including early education, K-12, lifelong education, foreign language, and some edutech contents. But there are a lot of edutech companies participating in this fair because the online learning industry is growing very fast. And there are some other fairs mainly focused on edutech. And now, for those of you who are not familiar with Trade Commissioner Service, I'd like to introduce our TCS quickly. Trade Commissioner Service is a free service of Government of Canada, helping Canadian companies to prepare for international markets, assess market potential, find qualified contacts, and resolve business problems. And here, TCS Seoul arranges various activities and events related to education, such as Asian fairs, participation in recruitment fairs, and networking seminars. And we are actually running several info sessions for Korean students here. Now we are actually go to the Q&A session. And I have actually received many good questions from you. So I thought I could share some of the frequently asked questions first, and then probably we can have another live questions. Is it okay, Kate? I'm just gonna continue with frequently asked questions
Yes,
first.
please. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I am gonna share some of the questions I have received from you, and they are very good and insightful questions. So the first question is, how do you see the change in demographic impact higher education in South Korea in the future? So I'm gonna show you the school age population in Korea here. Yes, as you can see, Korea is experiencing changes in demographic, and there has been a sharp drop in the school age population. And the school is closing every year. So in the graph here, it is expected that the school age population will go down below 5 million from 2026 and even below 4 million by 2033. This in turn reduced the number of schools and the universities, and there will be more competition to become and work as a teacher as a result of the decrease in student number. So my expectation, and I've read some articles and some of the experts expect in the K-12 sector, the current centered education will transfer to tailored education, and the school curriculum will change. So there will be more career-focused programs with the adoption of credit-based system. And for universities, especially colleges, will aim to adopt more lifelong learning programs. so they can take more adult students. Yep. And the second question is related to Korean travel restrictions for Canadians in Korea. And I have prepared some of the instructions if you want to travel from Canada to Korea, as well as from Korea to Canada. So if you want to travel to Korea from Canada, you have to apply for a visa at the Korean embassy in Ottawa or one of the Korean consulates in Canada, because the visa-free entry is temporarily suspended due to COVID-19. So you need PCR test within 48 hours before the departure, also upon arrival in Korea. And now there is mandatory self-quarantine for 7 days, regardless of your vaccination status. And if you want to travel from Korea to Canada, in terms of fully vaccinated travelers, of course, you need an ETA or study permit, and you need to take the pre-entry test within 72 hours of your scheduled flight. And you have to download ArriveCAN application and must prepare a quarantine plan. Yes, and now actually Canadian government says you have to avoid non-essential travel outside Canada, regardless of your vaccination status. And the third question I have received, what are top university programs in demand in Korea? So here, you can see generally the university's top program in Korea is business, computer science, and social studies. And for colleges, it's nursing, public health, and social work. But with the fourth industrial revolution, the future of semiconductors industry is regarded very promising. So with these positive job prospects and the ties with big companies like Samsung, LG, the demand for this course is rising rapidly. So these days, a lot of students relate their major with their future jobs. So they prefer to choose the course that they can secure their jobs when they complete their studies. Either they study in Korea or other foreign countries. So I think Canadian colleges have potential to recruit some of the Korean students by highlighting the high employment rate after they graduate from Canadian colleges and institutions, and also the immigration opportunities. Traditionally, Korean people were aiming to get a job in big companies. And of course, there are steady demand for this. But recently, the young millennial generation prefer tech companies over the big companies like Naver, Kakao, and Coupang. And that is why they are interested in AI, machine learning, and big data, because they can also get a job there. Here you can see the majority of new courses introduced in 2022, mainly focus on AI, big data, and future mobility. And it seems like there is less demand for liberal arts program. And the fourth question is, what is the most important factor when Koreans select a study destination and education institution? Of course, there are a lot of factors that affect Korean people's decision. But generally, for university students, of course, the reputation of university is important. And for college students, job prospects, work opportunities, and definitely immigration opportunities. And for K-12 students, yes, safety, especially during COVID. And the study environment, for example, if the society welcomes their students, or the level of competition there. And generally, the tuition fee, and of course, again, job prospects. And to give you more information about how they make their decision, it is actually very important to know that the information that flow by word of mouth is very important, and there is very strong power of referrals in this country. And Korean people actually visit local agencies and listen to their advice, because they like to share the information with each other. That's why the internet communities like Naver blogs, some community cafes exist to share their information and experience. And it seems like they tend to believe what others say, and they like to hear the actual experiences who studied in Canada. And that's why I keep telling my clients to have some sort of engagement with their alumni, yes. And the question 5, some prospects for English language language programs. Yes, it's actually a very challenging market. And yes, Korean people still take English program, to improve their skills for academic and professional reasons. But as you, have seen in the data, the number has been declined over the years due to the increased availability of programs in Canada and increased number of native speakers in Canada. But still, there are students who choose to study in Canada because many parents view English education as a top priority, and they also prefer immersion in an English-speaking environment. And that is why young students, like from grades 1 to 7, take the short-term language learning programs, such as summer or winter camps in Canada. But like I mentioned, there are a lot of competitions. So yeah, think about combine the English language program with other Korea-focused program or like on-the-job training. I believe it will be more attractive for the Korean students. And the last question, what is the outlook, market outlook for the next years? Well, honestly, I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future, because the situation is changing all the time. So, I cannot expect what's going to happen in the near future. But actually, the market seems to recover from last October, when I actually attended the local recruitment fair in Korea. There are quite a lot of students who are interested in studying abroad. And there are students who have been deferring their studies due to the pandemic. And university or college students still saying that they will go overseas when the international travel opens again. So yes, definitely there is demand, but the timing of recovery really depends on how the COVID situation will change. And market will recover slowly, I guess. But for Koreans, Canada is still top of their mind. So, which is a, good sign for Canadian institutions. Yeah, and I think I've covered pretty much all the questions in this slide. So yeah, if you want to, go through more live questions, I'm gonna,
Yes, thank you so much, Sohee, and thank you, Regina, as well for the presentation. I think it's very informative and very comprehensive. Thank you again for that. I am also cognizant of the time that we have for today's webinar. So we have 3 minutes left. So we probably can go over just a couple of questions. And so he has her contact information here. So please feel free to email her if we cannot go over all the questions. So first question was regarding to the fair that was postponed, which was supposed to happen in February. So is that still happening? I guess that's the one you mentioned that's scheduled for March.
Oh, I'm not sure if this question relates the networking event or the recruitment fair. I can explain both of them. I am in terms of the local recruitment fair, we are not participating for the March International Education Fair. So we will participate. We are actually planning to participate for October, but yes, we are not attending for March fair. Okay. And for if you're talking about the other networking events, actually I'm hosting Canada, Korea, like virtual colleges and universities networking seminar, which combines the presentation session as well as the B2B meetings between Canadian and Korean colleges and universities so that they can discuss their partnership opportunities. But I've actually closed the registration and it's gonna happen within 2 weeks. So yeah, I don't have extra spot for this, but well, I'm gonna keep you updated for the future events because I will be hosting another networking session by the end of this year or maybe beginning of next year, probably in person.
Okay, thank you. We're having 1 minute here, so I guess we will ask one last question to Sohee. The question I have here is there such of a market for short-term programs for university students less than 4 weeks?
Okay, so I'm not sure if you're referring to the short-term programs for language training only or some sort of program that combines, like I said, the work placement. But for language training, yes, still there is some demand because as I mentioned, there are some programs that are funded by government. Yeah, for example, the Paran Sadari program and global practical training program. So some universities and colleges, keep sending their students overseas, and they are trying to identify and select those excellent institutions in other English-speaking countries. But my suggestion and recommendation is actually if you can, customize the program to combine the language training as well as some of the, work placements and, training related to some sort of career with the focus on career. I think it's gonna be more beneficial for you to, develop the partnership with them and recruit the potential students from Korea.
Okay. Perfect. So we're now here just about 5:01 p.m. here Vancouver time. So I guess this is all the time that we have for today's webinar. I want to thank, on behalf of BCCIE, I want to thank Sohee and Regine for joining us today and for providing the insights into Korean international education. And we would like to also hear from our participants in terms of how you thought about today's webinar went. So when you log out on Zoom, please complete the survey and your feedback will be very appreciated. Again, thank you so much everyone for joining us tonight. Have a great evening. Please feel free to send your questions to Sohee. Here she has her contact information here. And also to Sohee and Regine, have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye
Have a good
bye.
evening.
Bye.
Bye.